Hi, how's it going? Welcome to Security Side Quest featuring the Safe. The Safe from featuring Security Side Quest. Sorry. Welcome. Today, as you could tell, it's just me. I am your singular host today. Dr. Tristan Watty should be out for the next, I believe, 2 or 3 episodes. So welcome. I'm going to go through this. Everyone's got to be super nice because this is my first solo episode. So behave in the chat. Everyone, let's get into it. We always start off with a hello. Please drop in the chat where you're from, where you're calling in from. Ask questions, do the thing. Look into, maybe do some chatting. The security issues that we're going to talk about, especially because since I am alone, I'm going to talk about incident response. And so I have a lot to say about that. If you're a regular watcher of the show. If you're not a regular watcher of the show, that's fine. Our episodes, we like to contain them as much as possible. So that way you don't have to have seen any of our episodes before. So last week, we went over our haunted infrastructure, an Amazon detective investigation. This week, we're going to go over critical hit detected, initiating incident response. So I will go over a couple of topics. We'll go over some things like the IR cycle in general. It's not necessarily specific to, the cloud and cloud security, but it is definitely something that you should know. We'll go over building IR playbooks, automated detection, how you can set that up, and collecting appropriate data and logs, and able to, actually complete an IR engagement and be able to, at least see what goes into it behind the screen. Maybe that's something that is something that you've been through already. Feel free to add your experience. We don't want to necessarily listen to just my experience. I think there's a lot of people out there that work on AWS that can definitely add to the conversation and have that going. So without further ado, I am going to ask our little question that we always do. And then this is actually a one that we've done before. And I want to go back to this. What is your favorite breakfast food? I am from the Northeast region, so breakfast sandwiches are pretty big. I like I'm a, pork roll, egg, and cheese, specifically from New Jersey. So, if anyone's from New Jersey out there, you know what a pork roll is. I think that this is a good one just because I feel like that's such a varied answer, and people, have different, not just breakfast foods, but also just, different types of breakfasts that people eat. Because, my response is always an actual specific breakfast food, but some people are like, "Oh, I like overnight oatmeal." I'm like, "Well, that's a good one." Or someone will be like, "Cold pizza," and I'll be like, "I'm not judging. Do it too." So, throw in the chat if you want to answer any of the questions. Feel free. We are going to move on to some of the issues that we're going to address. Some things that you may encounter in a threat detection, incident response type of scenario. I'm missing out on a lot of different things. Producer Jeff, he's here with me, so I'm not really alone. I've got producer Jeff. And also Erie. Thank you, Erie. Appreciate that. And your answer was huevos rancheros. You can't go wrong with a breakfast burrito or basically anything with flour, meat, all the things that you can get in that. So that was a good icebreaker. I think, without Tristan. I'm stealing from his bank of questions, so I'm not as good coming up with the good questions. He's got like good hypotheticals, like, oh, would you rather do this or that? And I'm like, man, where do you come up with these? So you know, a shout out to you know, the absent Dr. Tristan Watty. Yeah. Oh, thank you, producer Jeff. I appreciate it. I'm gonna need it today. Especially balancing, you know, non-security and security topics. I don't want to go off the rails too bad. So let's just jump right into this. I think this is kind of one of those topics where it's so broad and can get so very specific. So let's just jump right into it, kind of skip ahead and get into the actual, you know, IR framework, if you will. So there's a lot of different ways to look at incident response. You know, you have your NIST version, you have your SANS version, you have AWS. Everyone's got their own framework for IR, but they have a lot of the same steps, just maybe labeled differently from like which phase is which. So the one that I'm going to go over is going to be a little bit of a simplified version. So we're going to go into the preparation phase, the identification phase, containment, investigation, and recovery. And so the purpose of incident response is to be able to take a security event, determine whether it is an incident or not, find out the scope of the incident, contain, mitigate, and recover. There's a lot that goes into that than just every time there's an incident. You know, there's a lot you have to do to prepare. An incident is not exactly the most casual, calm-free time. And so when you're going through an engagement like this, especially if it's something that you know, your organization hasn't experienced before, it can be a lot. And so, you know, having that focus on the preparation phase and the recovery phase, those are going to be two of the big ones, because, you know, you have to pre-configure in preparation. You have to have your detections configured. You have to have everything set up so that way you can make that determination if there is an incident. And so having all of that, the threat detection set up and preparing for an incident. So setting or creating an incident response plan. I say it all the time just because you don't want that moment to be the moment where you're running around without knowing what to do. So preferably it's something that is brought up and started by leadership, security leadership. But if that's something that you don't have in your organization, nothing wrong with raising your hand and saying, hey, do we have an incident response plan? Is there run books in case, you know, there's something that we have to respond to? You know, you're the security expert, you know, sometimes you'll have to point things out and say, hey, we don't have this process. This could really help us in the event of a security incident. So there's a lot that goes into preparation besides just creating an incident response playbook and having some detections. You know, we also want to ensure that, you know, a part of that incident response plan, you know, documented. So document the incident response plan, document, you know, how you're going to manage those, both from like an operations perspective and some other, from like the business perspective. And there's a lot of things that go into incident response that is, you know, more than just how an incident response team handles an event. You know, you're not just containing and mitigating. You have to go through and communicate with different branches of the organization or, you know, business. So dealing with, you know, PR, does BR, DR, all of the recovery acronyms. It can be a lot and it can be overwhelming. So it's kind of just a reminder to establish communication channels and escalation points before you have to run into the issue. Having those channels set up, having a dedicated team. So even if you're not an incident responder, there's still a lot of things that you can be doing, say adding a SOC analyst to be able to do some log analysis, or running down different tickets or evidence collection. You need a lot of hands in this process. So having those set up, dedicated, and thought about ahead of time, and also having it written down somewhere, because just because you have a plan doesn't mean that everyone agrees to this plan. It has to be written down. Everyone has to read it, understand what they're looking at, and agree, because an incident is not the time to go, well, I think this should go to Dan or Barry. That's not what you want. You want as little challenges or roadblocks, get the bureaucracy out of the way early. So yeah, doing all that you can do to have yourself ready in case there's an incident. So the first step is going to be identifying. That's not the first phase, but it is the first step. You have to identify, say for example, you get a guard duty finding. Okay, what are you going to do with that now? You have to triage, look to see, is this a high severity? Is this something that needs to be immediately contained? Is this something that, we'll go into later a little bit about automating the incident response processes, but is this something that was auto quarantined? Is this, basically looking in, seeing the scope, doing a minimal amount of investigation to be able to see what is going on, looking for not just the threat, but also the entire extent as much as possible of the incident. So maybe you detect on exfil, but then when you look at the exfil log, you see an access key, and you're like, oh, it seems like all of the activity was under this one access key. Okay, now hey, we saw exfil in the guard duty alert, but this allowed us to find something that maybe our alerts missed. That's the whole idea behind defense in depth. And so, you also want to include that in your incident response plan. So identifying, which type and severity level, and what the incident you're responding to is, being able to, hopefully after the preparation phase, you have the documentation to be able to know what things are supposed to look like routinely and how they look different because of this incident. So yeah, that's definitely something that kind of encompasses all in the identification phase or steps. And so once you have everything identified and properly scoped, you should have a better idea of what resources are being affected and how you would like to respond to this. Is it something where, we have evidence of lateral movement, maybe we don't have the full scope and we should go through, sort of like that, just to be able to have the entirety of the attack within, you don't need to know everything at this point. It's kind of an iterative process going through containment, investigation, and all of these middle phases, because you don't catch everything on the first shot necessarily. You will have to go back and be like, oh, I just found some new information that maybe changes everything or allows you to look through a different set of logs, whatever that may be. You're definitely going to run into some sort of case like that where you have to go through and, maybe you're trying to get to containment. So, understanding the entire scope and then being able to put preventative measures in place so that way it doesn't get worse. There's nothing for the attacker to do. Containment is going to be actually making those or enforcing those mechanisms to be able to keep the access where it is, or completely, as much as possible, boot whatever compromise is occurring in your environment, and not having the attacker any more access or something like that. So, for example, this is something that we see regularly with obfuscation attempts, which is important in containment. You want to contain and fully mitigate the incident. And so full mitigation is like cleaning up resources and ensuring that the fix is a permanent thing that will prevent this sort of incident from occurring in the future. And so you really want to look at this in a more overall holistic view. So not just say, for example, changing your security group to block the specific IP, that's good for like an initial containment perspective, but long term, they're just going to change their IP address. So, going through and fully understanding the breadth and the scope of the incident before you make those changes, especially because if you start making changes and the threat actor or attacker or whatever you want to call it is still within the production environment or your account, whatever, once they see those changes, they're going to know that someone has detected their attack or whatever incident that is occurring. I'm going to go with attack. Most of the time, it's the most common ones we see are like access credentials being leaked somehow or exposed somehow, and or them being found out, sold on the black web, all different ways of doing that. But once, say in this example, the credentials have been leaked, what happened after that? We don't want to just say block one single IP address. We have to see the totality of what happened. So, looking through different procedures for isolation and quarantine and looking through obfuscation attempts. For example, I was referring to the credentials. And so, for example, if there's like an access key or something like that is being used by an attacker, then they're going to know that access key is probably going to be rotated almost first thing. That's a part of our incident response documentation that we'll go over later. It's basically your first step. And so when you're an attacker, especially because you definitely want to think like an attacker as an incident responder, so you see that and you go, well, they know that is iffy. It's an easily contained or mitigated initial access point. And so you're going to want to look for lateral movement or some sort of method for this attacker to be able to re-access. And so there's different ways that can happen. Sometimes you see someone with an access key use that access key to create temporary tokens, like in STS. Sometimes we see EC2 key pairs. So there's these little things, that are meant for authorization and authentication. And these are the tools that they're going to have to, or mechanisms that they're going to have to, exploit or work around in order to be able to have full access. So there's a lot, that can go into even the most simple engagements, just because, there's so many different things that they can do once an attacker has access to your account. You have a lot of resources, you have a lot of things going on in your account, multiple accounts potentially, and it can just spill over into a giant mess and a very big headache super quickly. And so, we don't want to just skip right through and then go, well, that was a bad incident. Let's hope it never happens again. The last step, your recovery, is also, your feedback or summary or lessons learned, whatever you want to call it. That phase is going to be one of your most important ones. You should really, especially during this time of having an incident, it basically the worst case scenario for cybersecurity. Like, the thing that we tried to prevent happened. And so you can really learn a lot from, what failed, what didn't work, how were they able to get around our defenses, how did they get in initially. There's a lot to learn from that, not just you as security, professionals, but in general, there's a lot to be learned, organization wide. How do we do this? How do we, overcome these things, or how did they overcome our challenges, the things that we tried to put in place to be able to stop or prevent these from occurring. So there's a lot in there that is more of a review of what happened. For example, things like, backups. Oh, how did we back up our the data that we have? Were we using those backups regularly? Especially when you're talking about things like ransomware or destruction or exfil, like you have to have those backups ready to go. If there's anything changed by an attacker, things like versioning and automated backups are going to be helpful. But, looking into that, especially if you do come into a ransomware situation, looking back at that and being like, how did we get to this point? How did we get, how did we allow a threat actor to get all the way from our perimeter into our most important or critical data? So these are the types of questions that you want to be asking, things that you can do better, or, different mechanisms or security procedures or best practices that you can implement. It's really a really good time to review, especially if you haven't done it in a while, like review not just your current state, but your target state, and using your threat modeling documentation and all of these things that you make when you see Tristan and his team. Use those to be able to be like, okay, well, how did we do? How do we compare against our target state strategy? Like, there's a lot that can be done, especially in the direct aftermath of an incident. Sometimes there's a little extra budget for, new things, but you definitely want to look and see what the most impactful things. That's kind of what you want to do after an incident is go through, hopefully create some sort of lessons learned document or after action report, something like that, and really go through and review not just the threat actor's actions, but your own actions in response and what led up to the response, whatever event led to your incident. There's a lot to be learned there. There's a ton to be learned there that could be really good. And I know I'm kind of going into maybe more detail than is necessary for each phase, but I feel like it's just those things that kind of get, those little things that get dropped, those basics that get forgotten, that really kind of come back to bite us in the end. So that's why I go through it and try to explain that it's not a one step here, next step here. It's not the, like the cyber kill chain where it's a nice clean process. It's messy. You go back and forth between phases. Things happen. New information comes to light. Maybe the forensics investigation comes back. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of data to go through. So I think that's, for me, the recovery phase is one of the most important pieces for us. So I think that's something that can definitely help out organizations and anyone, not just those who are in security, but, leadership that wants to learn more about how to react when these happen. I mean, you have to get legal review and all of these different, places outside of just IT and security. So it definitely helps to not only understand, but also to be able to communicate those, processes and ideas and security best practices and stuff, to be able to communicate that and why it's necessary, especially around an incident when everyone's going to be asking for more information. So having said that, I do want to get in a quick poll. Enter 1, 2, 3, or 4 into the chat. Let me know what your primary IR challenge is. what do you see as your biggest challenge? Is it log aggregation and analysis, issue maybe with the automated response implementation? I know that's a little bit more advanced, so that could be something that's a higher amount of people who have that challenge. Cross-account incident handling and forensic data collection. So post that in the chat. Let me know what you think. I'm obviously going to go over what I think, but you can go ahead and tell me that I am wrong. Okay, so we have one for log aggregation and analysis and one for forensic data collection. Okay, so data, log aggregation is going to be, well, these are both similar. Log aggregation is going to be all of your regular logs, access logs, VPC flow logs, CloudTrail logs, all those things. But when it comes to forensic data collection, oh, we have another for log aggregation. Cool. But forensics data collection, that's when you get into the things like instance, EC2, memory analysis, different data sources that aren't maybe logs that'll be still relevant to your investigation. So I think a lot of this, a lot of the confusion around forensics is really just the name forensics, I think, freaks everyone out a little bit. So I do understand why people do have some issues with that. But log aggregation and analysis is a good one, because I think that even some of the most mature teams might still have a challenge with this, because first of all, logging every single thing that you do within your cloud account adds a lot of data. If you do every single action you take has multiple API events, then your CloudTrail is going to look huge and scary and completely, completely overwhelming. And so there's definitely a lot that can be done for auto log aggregation and stuff like that. But realistically, I think the biggest challenge for that is cost when it comes to the logs in the cloud. Not only is it expensive to have all of these different log sources, especially if they're constantly going all the time. There's different methods to be able to, do sampling or some sort of increased capability with, doing more with less, if you will. And so that's definitely a thing. And then also the tooling to be able to aggregate all of those logs. So having a SIEM or some sort of software or tooling like that, not only is that a challenge and it has its own cost associated with it, but being able to take in all of these different types of logs and then reformat them into a centralized format is a pain all on its own. So I totally understand. That. I think that's something that is a challenge, even for me every day. Just being able to get the visibility to be able to see the things that happened, is going to be huge. So, yeah, thanks for putting in some responses. It helps, so that way I don't feel like I'm talking at you. It feels like I'm talking with you. We have a question. I feel like automated is good, but what happens if an attacker gets around automations? How would you know unless stuff starts going missing or leaked? Well, so this is part of the detection part of it, right? So sometimes you don't find it until stuff starts going missing or leaked. You find out real quickly that there's a problem then. Ideally, this would be part of your detection set. So I'm not really sure what you mean by automated is good. Do you mean automated response implementation? Because if that's the case, that's more like, oh, okay, yeah. So because you're looking to automate the response itself. So realistically, what you're doing is setting pretty much if-then statements. So like conditional detections. So like, for example, if maybe this For example, maybe if Trufflehog, which is a tool that searches for AWS credentials, specifically, I believe in GitHub, but a tool like Trufflehog, if you're using that, you might find a credential that you didn't know, was publicly accessible, and so you would have that that automation just say, if you receive an alert that a credential is found, then automatically rotate that credential. So it's hopefully just going to do the same actions that you would do as a responder, but just as soon as the alert or whatever trigger is the condition for the rule or the alert or whatever, insert word there, for whatever that is, it's you're hoping to just make that process faster, not necessarily make it different. So you're still going to quarantine VPCs or instances or whatever. You're just going to have it based off of whatever trigger is relevant to your organization. So if you're worried more about something like access keys, then my example is more relevant. Or if you're, for example, using Macy to find critical data, critical infrastructure, whatever, say a secret pops up from Macy. So if a Macy rule triggers, then just quarantine the related VPC or S3 bucket or whatever, wherever that data was found. So yes, you could definitely get around automations, but hopefully, as far as the incident response process goes, it's really nothing new to necessarily get around. It's really just doing those initial incident I'm going to get into the automated response, but that's a good question. So I will get into it a little bit. And also, yeah, being a noob is also totally cool. I know that we have a lot of super intelligent security engineers that are in the chat regularly, sometimes with a little bit of banter. Feel free, if you don't feel like you're, the most knowledgeable or confident, this show's for you too. We can answer clarifying questions. We can get it a little bit into the weeds, or just kind of go over some of the basics that maybe you need to have for context for the discussion. So please feel free in the chat. I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't want to comment, and that's fine. But if you want a clarification on something or to ask a question, don't worry about what level the question is or whatever. If it helps you to be able to engage with the discussion, that's all that matters. So yeah, let's finish up on this poll, and then we can get back to, of course, our, well, I'm not as good as Tristan with having the things ready and ready to go. So we're going to do a knowledge quest. So our scenario today is let's say it's a larger financial institution. And this financial institution has issues with, I don't know, let's say incident response. They just had, let's say, a ransomware event. They got lucky and they were able to get the encryption key. Everything was fine. But that close call really scared some people, lit that fire, and everyone was like, we need to be more security focused. How do we do that? And that's where you're going to come in, hopefully, and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Incident response plan, first and foremost. And then let's go into the preparation phase. Go back and look through that. We'll go over, I'm going to show some of our wonderful side quests. and we'll go over some of the documentation and workshops and stuff that you can do to maybe get a little bit more comfortable with incident response. But if this is your scenario, you have an entire not large, but medium-sized organization who's like, what do we do? How do we prevent this from happening again? Help us. Especially if there's not a mature, team or process involved, it can be overwhelming. So you go, okay, what do I do? Okay, well, you look through the preparation phase. There's a lot of P's involved. Preparation phase, and then look at what you need for that. So, how are your rules configured? Have you set up different rules? So, if you're looking to enhance or mature your architecture, why not look at automated response? Look and think what can be possible. Are you going to maybe implement event bridge rules, create your own lambdas, or even, for example, creating runbooks for instance isolation within Systems Manager? You have a lot of options, especially, one of my, I would say, more favored aspects of AWS is it is very customizable. There's a lot that you can do that's very specific to your organization. There's multiple ways to do the same thing. So, using what is relevant more towards your situation, what you're looking to do, and also a little bit of what as a security professional. So we have a question. New developer, unsure of what I'm looking for. Okay, so yes, there is some information on, what is IR and how to get into that. And I think that in general is going to be, I think specifically the, unsure of what you're looking for. It's going to be tough. You want to kind of think about, instead of what you're looking for, what are you trying to protect? What are you looking to do? So if you're starting out with an incident response plan, I don't know what to do. Well, first of all, I do have a, I'm going to try to share my screen. So we do have our documentation that does address incident response. I'm pulling that up right now because, again, I'm just not as quick as Tristan Watty, That's just good. What can I say? So here we have the security incident response technical guide. So this is kind of like our basic, hey, this is how AWS, would prefer incident response. Well, not prefer, but this is going over some of the fundamentals and maybe how you can do incident response. So obviously this one asks, are you well architected? That's a great first question. Sometimes when you don't have, exact guidance of where to go or what to do, they'll ask those questions. Are you well architected? Have you looked at the well architected framework? Have you gone over the security best practices? Have you, talked to leadership about incident response? So this is going to go over this right here. Some of the standards and frameworks. So looking at best practices, of course, the AWS, the CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework. There's a lot here. This goes over the NIST documents for incident response. So this goes over what I'm talking about right now, and kind of goes into a little bit more of that detail, which is, why you'll see later that this is one of our, level 100 side quests, because this is where you would go for, I don't know what to do. What is happening? What should I expect? Things like that. And, how do I create an incident response playbook? We're going to go over that, but we could also just skip ahead because, we do stuff like that. Let me stop sharing. We'll add the links for this in the chat, so that way everyone will have them. But we'll do that later when we actually go over the side quest stuff. So does that answer your question? Kind of like, if I didn't know where to go or what to do, at least I have some prescriptive guidance from AWS. Yes. Okay, cool. So yeah, just to go back maybe a little bit before we jumped right into the plans or the phases, what do I do? I think that this is exactly why you want to have that ahead of time. So that way you don't feel that feeling when there is an incident. When you realize, oh, wow, this isn't like a false positive. This is actually happening right now. Sometimes that is really nerve-wracking. So great question. I think all of us kind of, when we are stressed or nervous, like during an IR engagement, some of those higher functions, don't work quite as well, and you're stressing and sweating and so, yeah. I think that this is why we give those, give out these resources and these side quests to be able to kind of come, I guess, to terms with that and how we would handle ourselves in that sort of situation. So yeah, I think that, hopefully that answers your question. And then I do want to get a little bit into the forensics data collection, just because I think that is something that people tend to get a little bit nervous about when they hear forensics. They're like, ooh, I can't do forensics. There's, chain of evidence and collection and things have to be done in a certain way. And but that's only really for, legal action. So, forensics is also just a part of an incident response, investigation. It's part of the process. When you're looking at a specific event, you're going to go through a couple different places. You're going to look at CloudTrail, right? So that way you could see the API calls that happen, and hopefully there's some, calls that explain, that malicious activity. So you're going to look through CloudTrail for that sort of thing. You're going to look at the user sessions and see who's logged in when, and who called what resource, and when were these access keys or tokens created. All that information is stuff that you're going to want to see in CloudTrail, and those logs are going to be important. And so then you're going to look at different logs. So VPC flow logs, S3 access logs. And then, when you're going to drill down into it, especially if you're, doing something like an application or running in EC2, you're going to want to be able to grab those, that memory for those attached volumes. And that's the sort of thing that people, I think security professionals who haven't run a lot of incident response and forensics types of investigations, I think they get a little bit scared at that point. But realistically, it's just collecting the relevant evidence that, might be ephemeral or might be in some way changed or mutated if things are shut down or things are, for like an EC2 instance, if you're terminating that instance, there goes all the good data that you wanted to hold on to. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things that, like, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, everyone was like, oh, if you get a virus, you just got to unplug the computer and everything will be okay. That's not really how this works anymore. So, that's kind of like one of those dated things that just seems to, last and stick in everyone's mind because it's really just an easy plug it from the internet. And, I think a lot of those different things that we learned as personal computing users may not apply at the enterprise level. It's not just your desktop and your router. It's, hundreds of instances and dozens of VPCs. So, just unplugging everything and bringing production down is not a valid response to that. So it's kind of like looking at what needs to be looked at, collecting the data before something gets terminated or lost, and getting that and being able to use that to find out more about what happened with the attack or incident. So yeah, let's real quick before I jump into the side quests, let's talk a little bit about playbooks. I think we skipped ahead a little bit earlier, but playbooks. So what makes up a good playbook? Having some of the basics. So first thing is, who's the responder? What are your response team roles? What are their responsibilities? Who's in charge of what? So for example, say you have a medium-sized or smaller organization and you want to create some sort of response team. So you say, you know what, we'll need 2 incident responders, 2 SOC analysts, and an incident commander. That you don't need much more. Well, you need more roles, but but for the security team, like simple like that. You know what? I'm going to have 2 SOC analysts and 2 responders and an incident commander. The incident commander is going to be the team lead of the incident response team. The SOC analysts are going to be from here, and the incident responders are going to be from our whatever team. It doesn't really matter, but as long as you're putting that down there, like here's where these people will be coming from for the response team, and this is what they'll be in charge of during a response. So your roles and responsibilities. Then you're going to want communication procedures, because who are you going to talk to when you find out that this is not a false positive, it's a true positive? Is there an escalation path that you normally use? Is there a separate one when there's a confirmed incident? There's a lot of different things. I don't think any of these are like wrong. So if you're like, no, we'll just use our regular intake, like that's fine. It doesn't really matter. As long as these are thought out and written down ahead of time, that's really all that matters. Obviously, you go through your first incident, things might not work out great because who gets it right the first try? But at least you won't have that beginning panic and wasting time because you don't understand what to do first or how to get in contact with this infrastructure team or whatever that may look like. So you want your roles and responsibilities, your communication procedures. Also, there's a recommendation that you use some sort of matrix to classify incidents. This could be as simple as like a 1, 2, 3 severity or 1 through 5 severity. It doesn't really matter as long as you're trying to classify those in a way that prioritizes higher severity responses. And then you're also going to want to have templates for your documentation and example runbooks. Runbooks don't need to be in the IR playbook, but the documentation templates and stuff like that should have at least an outline of what your runbooks will look like, as well as some either example or template communication. So having those there will be really helpful in that sort of situation. So, taking your IR playbook and then integrating that with your normal workflow. I don't know what that's going to look like in your organization. So maybe it's Jira, maybe it's Slack. Maybe it's neither. Maybe you're using email alert, or you have some sort of pager tooling, whatever it may be. But those are the things that you need to keep in mind is your normal workflow and how you integrate this playbook, this IRP into your workflow. And then there's some things that you want to make sure that you are collecting in this sort of incident. well, in any incident, excuse me, but it's something that you want included in the incident response playbook. It's just the things that you want to ensure. So your chain of custody procedure, if forensics is something that you are going to handle in-house. I know that's a lot of the time contracted out to a third party. But if you are going to do forensics in-house, then you should definitely have a chain of custody procedure and evidence collection logs. In general, for IR, there should be investigation timelines and summaries. There's also response logs and lesson learned, like template or example or something like that, to show what should be in those lessons learned. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of how you build your incident response plan. You know, as you saw, I didn't go over, oh, what happens when, you know, we get malware on our S3 bucket. Like, that's not what the IRP is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be at that tactical level. It's really high level. This is what should happen during incidents. This is hopefully, ideally, what will happen. And so try not to bog yourself down too much, especially with every little process or mechanism. Doesn't need to be that specific, but there's certain things that you want to have documented, you know, like your chain of custody and you know, collection requirements and stuff like that. But that's really the only time you're going to get into specifics. It's not really going to tell you necessarily how to do all those things or who and when is each of those steps going to take place. That's what your run books are for. So you want your playbook to be a little bit more general and have a little bit more overall guidance instead. And that way, you know, you can link to the appropriate run book based off of the attack or detection, whatever. But I do want to quickly go over our side quests and like to go over some resources that can help you out, learn more, and also get your hands on these things to be able to feel more proficient, or as Tristan says, to build aura. So our first one is our level 100, our Explorer. This is going to be our basics, you know. We already went over what is incident response, you know. Introduction, what does security incident response look like? That's not what I wanted. So, you know, going back to the homepage, just a general idea. This is a little bit drier, but it's also like the things that you should know before you go into more, I don't want to say advanced, but deeper into incident response and how that might look. So the next is going to be our, excuse me, I put the wrong link in there. That's not it. We want to do our Security Hub. So what is Security Hub? This is going to be, you know, your basics. This is, you know, it doesn't have to be your place where, you know, all of your detections are. Depends on your organization, whatever, your environment. But this is just kind of an overall view of your cloud security posture, which is what CSP stands for, Cloud Security Posture Management. So this is also good information that you want to know before you start, you know, running into incident response engagements all happy and willy-nilly. And so we also want some hands-on capability with our incident response, because we don't want to be practicing during an incident. That's not what we want to do, as far as getting our hands on, is just waiting for something to happen. So we have a workshop here. It's a simulation of an incident. So going through and creating a script for, hey, unauthorized credential use. What happens when you find some sort of unauthorized activity or some sort of activity that, you know, you find out is because, whoops, my access key got exposed. How do we handle that? Okay, we're going to go over things like setting up our simulation, reviewing logs, going over the actual detection of it, investigating. I actually really like these workshops. Don't look at the team that's responsible for these workshops, but I really like them completely unbiasedly. I know unbiasedly is not a word, but I'm going to use it anyway. And then we have our nope, that's the same thing. Yeah, you don't got to tell me that I'm not as good as Tristan. I know it. It's fine. He's got these all ready to go up, and what the heck? I must have did not copy these into our episode guide very well. Anyway, we also have some different workshops that hopefully are in the chat already. Yep. Okay, so the links are already in the chat. We also have a workshop for something a little bit more advanced. In this case, this one is ransomware. Say ransomware on S3. And I actually have the link for it this time. So kind of getting into the, I didn't change my thing. I got to change to from our adventurer and up to our dungeon master. And this is going to be the ransomware. So simulating an attack using encryption on the server side. So SSEC, which was a thing last year around this time, actually, that we had to deal with. And so just kind of getting into a little bit more of a more complex and challenging scenario. This isn't just, hey, access key's gone. This is, oh, wow, I've got ransomware. I really need recovery at this point. Full mitigation and recovery. This one's going to be where your, backups are important. And then our final resource for you, or side quest, is going to be here. And this is going to be our Automate Incident Response and Forensics Guide. This is part of our prescriptive guidance. So this will go into some of the basics on how to do that. So not just the incident response itself, but what steps you can take to make those initial steps as quickly as possible, way quicker than we could do naturally as humans, and be able to have those things already, quarantined or contained or whatever, just being able to respond as quickly as possible. That's going to be all of our knowledge quests, or excuse me, our side quests. And yeah, so go check out these links, look into some of the resources, let me know what you think. If you don't think that those workshops are good, message me, we'll talk. I'll tell you why you're wrong. And then, hit us up on all of our social medias as well. Follow us, like us. And thank you so much. This was a really fun first episode, doing it by myself. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.